And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune. This is a show where you, the citizen, can raise your voice of all things concerning liberty. And tonight we have an interesting question. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, that's what the Bible says in some other religious books. But are we responsible for our brothers, not only here, but around the world? Interesting question. This has really come to light in recent times with some of the happenings in the Middle East. Really, it's not recent. It's been going on for hundreds, thousands of years, as far back as you could ever remember. But more recently, we have been involved, not involved, back involved, vice versa. So we're going to talk, if you haven't figured out tonight, about the Israeli versus the Palestine conflict, and more recently some of the wars, some of the shootings, some of the ambushes and different things, and how it affects the U.S. and our role in this whole thing. And to get started tonight, we have our friend, Mr. Kevin Wilson, host of A Free Solution up in Rochester, New York. Kevin, you're back on the Liberty Show. Get us started tonight.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me on again, Kevin. I thought you were going to forget the name of my show for a second there. It's all right. We got it though. Again, happy to talk about this. My whole take on this conflict is, well, I'd really rather the U.S. stay out of these conflicts altogether. I think that oftentimes what ends up happening, just whenever we get involved, whether it's in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, there are unintended consequences of our actions that end up creating blowback for us, that we end up with a worse situation in many instances than existed in the first place. And oftentimes the people living over there feel like we have interfered with their sovereignty, interfered with their ability to chart their own path and resolve their own conflicts. And so specifically to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the U.S. government has spent something on the order of $146 billion. And that's I'm just looking at the Wikipedia article on this. I actually think it's more than that when you adjust for inflation. Something like $3 billion a year for the last 40 years. Sending stuff to Israel. We've been funding the Israeli Defense Forces. We've been funding some legitimate defensive things like the Iron Dome over there, but also kind of giving cover to the Israeli Defense Forces abusing their power, curtailing the rights of Palestinians, and creating what I think you could arguably call an apartheid state. And the worst part about this is not only are we funding this side of the conflict, we're also funding the other side of the conflict too. We're giving money to the Palestinians. Now, a lot less money to the Palestinians, but we're still giving money to them. We had sent something like $200 million over to them this year. I think last May we had sent over several $100 million over to the Palestinians. And the unfortunate part is that although these are meant for, activities for humanitarian aid and things like that, the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, these groups tend to not give that money to where it needs to go. Unfortunately, a lot of that aid will probably end up in the hands of people in organizations who are themselves committing acts of violence against Israeli citizens, not just
or government officials.
Or government officials too, just end up in the hands of in their pockets. And that's a terrible thing. I don't feel strongly about that either side, that either government in this case is the good guy. I'm not yay Israel, yay Palestinian Authority. No, these are governments made up of flawed people. And I feel terrible for the Israeli citizens and the Palestinian citizens who are just trying to live their lives. But all of this money is coming in, and all this intervention is happening because terrible people want to continue a conflict that has lasted for way too long, while most people there probably just want peace. They want to be left alone. They want to live their lives and raise their family and feel safe. So that's my whole take on this conflict is the U.S. government should stay out. I think we make the situation worse, and I'm rooting for peace here. I'm not rooting for either side in this conflict.
Well, that's a really good start. But what is peace? We all say we're rooting for peace. That was Hitler's.
Yeah, right. How do you get that, right?
But you don't get off that easy, Kevin.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Not the wrong name. But I was doing a little research, and it was really interesting. One of the main reasons that America says that they're intervening is the refugees and the immigration problem. Back to that, Kev. But people don't realize before our Latino thing, one of the biggest levels of immigration was from the Jews, especially after World War II, which makes sense. But throughout, if you go to Chicago, New York, you see massive Jewish immigration. But because of these wars and conflicts, people have fled that area and that region. Well, because we do have some immigration issues, our government recognizes it. They just don't want to admit it, but they really want to settle, like you said, Kevin, have a peaceful living situation so people don't have to flee there and immigrate over here. So, we're still using some of these same, lackadaisical, laissez-faire, just really not idiotic, but just felt false and fake, as you would say, fake news type things to intervene. We want to intervene to make it safe so that you can stay there, not integrate to our country. It just sounds so good on paper, as my grandmother used to say. But there are so many refugees, Palestinians, both, that, as you said, have been displaced from their homeland. And it's funny, we go over, drop bombs, or we pay money for others to drop bombs. Then we send money to go rebuild it. What sense does that make? That is something we've been doing for years and years, which gets back to the military industrial complex. So we love war. We act like we don't, but we don't really want peace. We love war because there's lots of money. But we're going to talk more. So stay around, Kev. We're going to go next to Mr. Damon Kennedy, the Prince of Liberty, down in Stockbridge, Georgia. Hey, Damon, you're back on the Liberty Show.
Appreciate you, Kev. Fortune, and also Kevin Wilson. Great, batting leadoff for us. And so my thoughts on the Palestinian Israeli situation is kind of what, to piggyback off what Kevin Wilson mentioned, is that the best thing for us to do is stay out of it, because the unintended consequences of us being in there, and for as long as for the past several decades, we always act like we're the referee, but essentially it's kind of like the referee in a New England Patriots game. We're in the pocket for Israel. Everybody knows it. So we're giving all the calls to Israel while acting like we're impartial. Was that in and of itself creates unintended consequences for everybody knows. We try to play dumb, like we're just impartial. We just want to see peace. But no, everybody knows that Israel is pretty much our ally, and we give them billions upon billions of dollars a year, as y'all mentioned before. But the reality is we don't even have the money ourselves. So we're giving money to our quote unquote ally that we do not have. Now, everybody on this recording, we can be best of friends, and you can ask me for $100,000, but if I don't have it, I don't have it. So, but the reality is, Israel comes to us, we give them money, and it's really to me more like of a one-sided situation where it's not a good situation regardless between Israel and Palestine, but we make it worse by just giving this money to Israel, just no strings attached essentially, and saying, hey, here you go. Hey, you're our friend. But we're only friends that essentially to justify what is going on over there, because no matter what, everybody sees the United States as an instigator in this situation. And again, that's where a lot of this blowback comes from, because everybody sees us. If Israel does something that people consider heinous, well, we're essentially their ally along with that. So they see us as just as much the bad guys as Israel. So if we back away and say, look, y'all figure it out, to me, a two-state solution really is the common sense solution. But again, common sense is really it's not in style anymore. But if we can back away, say, look, Israel, you are our ally, yes, but you got to stop provocating or provoking the Palestinians with some of these attacks. Because I think it was a couple of weeks ago, President Biden, they always have every single president for the past, again, several decades. If Israel does something heinous, they've got to get in front of the cameras and act like, oh, well, it was okay. And they try to justify the unjustifiable. And that does not help us in any way, shape, or form. So to go back to Kevin's point, we've got to just back out of it and say, look, we want peace. We support peace. If somebody, creates an attack, as it stands right now, it's just a dog chasing his tail. We're in a merry-go-round. The Israelis do something, the Palestinians do something in retaliation, and it's like the Bloods and Crips all over again. So if we can back away and say, look, when somebody creates an attack, we can just, as a referee, an unbiased, impartial party to the situation, say, look, it's got to stop. I don't care who did it. Let's knock it off. And moving forward, that's how ultimately, I guess I'm wishing for a unicorn here, but we want peace as much as anybody. But the only way we can do that is backing away.
Well, I mean, I hear you, bro. Everyone says they want peace, but their actions don't. You don't want peace if you're dropping bombs and shooting rockets, and and if we're funding the war. So I think, like you said, with the president, it's a lot of lip service. But Damon, you don't get off that easy either. And we got to bring up our favorite subject. But because Damon is our race relations director for our show, Damon, it's mighty funny. We have all this money. Kevin Wilson, do I see him laughing over there? We have all this money to send to help Israel, but we don't have money for reparations stuff. What do you think about that, sir?
Well, it's quite funny that the United States was able to pay reparations to Jewish descendants here in America, and that didn't even the Holocaust didn't even happen here. So we got all the money, like you said, for everything else, but when it comes to Black folks, and then on an unrelated issue, I know today's topic is not this, but in the news today, you'll hear about critical race theory and how a lot of people are against it, but they can't accurately define it, right? So when you can't accurately define something, it kind of should impair your ability to be objective about it. And so to me, this idea that, and a lot of people don't understand that when they say no to reparations for the descendants of American slaves, but I don't know if they know, or maybe if they do know and they still reject that, the fact that they're okay with America paying reparations to Jews in America where it didn't happen here is just unconscionable. I just don't get it.
Well, and I love bringing these points up because it's really not a race thing. As a libertarian, there's no free lunch, and you just don't do that to people. But it's mighty, my big pet peeve, and I think we had this before when we talked about immigration, is we want to save the world, and we have so many problems here. I was talking to someone today. She was talking about moving outside of Atlanta to the country, the shootings. But even when I was recently up in Milwaukee, and just everywhere, they're just in like 4 days, there were like 10 murders. It's just the shootings, the crime, the drugs. And, we want to help everywhere else. And it's a beautiful thing. But let's start at home. We really got some issues here that we need to start. We want to go help the Palestinians, Israel, everybody. But there's still people here. A lot of people that are of color because of Jim Crow and laws and things down through the years that have oppressed people that are still struggling, have still, inequality, wealth, women's issues, transgender. And let's just start working on home. That's all I'm saying. So thank you, sir. You're still going to be the Prince of Liberty. I think you keep your crown for another month at least. So we're going to go to the newly elected part of the royal family, Mr. Patrick. Patrick down in the Sunshine State, down in Florida. Patrick, we got to get you a royal name. But Patrick, you're back on the Liberty Show.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you again. Just really want to highlight what Kevin, to lead the show off, had said is just the financial expenditure that the taxpayer has had to shoulder to support what's going on in the Middle East. And he had mentioned nearly 150 billion since the 1970s. 4 billion for Israel this year, and 250 million for Palestine. And Kevin, you mentioned this. We send Israel the billions to pay for the rockets to shoot down the rockets coming from Hamas, and then the damage that those rockets do, our taxpayer dollars fix it. So it really is a massive financial money sink, as best I see it. And at this point hasn't been raised yet, and you don't see it raised anywhere when we talk about the one-state solution, the two-state solution. Is there a financial incentive for a peace solution? That's a whole hell of a lot of money in 1 year, $4 billion or $250 million going to a small area of Palestine.
I agree with you, and not to cut you off, but that's what I'm saying. It's just like I saw a movie years ago. It's called War Inc., and it was talking about that. Then I would love to do a documentary. I would even star Kevin Wilson in it, called Immigration. They don't really want to solve it. There's too much money in it,
Right.
And seem like the war. And that's my point. All of these military industrial complex companies that are making billions and trillions of dollars, selling the weapons, rebuilding, all the contractors, sending, even the aid companies, these think tanks, or what do you call it? Social welfare, they go over there and rescue people and all of this, all that sounds good on paper, but there's still money. So if we cut it out, where'd all that money? They have a commercial I saw on TV the other day, begging for money for the peace of Israel and some kind of Israel association. And I'm not anti-Israel program, but it's like there's so much need right here in America. We've got buildings falling down, schools with no computers and pipes bursting, but we're building other people's computers. People with no healthcare in hospitals here that are just, we've got these fancy ones in the suburbs, but there are hospitals in the inner city, and it's not all just in the black areas, but in the city parts. They need finances. So continue, brother. You're on a really good road. I might have to promote you to the ambassador of liberty. I don't know. You're doing so great.
Well, what could 150 billion do for this country? We're talking infrastructure, and you mentioned it: roads, bridges, water that's poisonous, basically. What could that money do for this country? A lot, I would imagine. And you look at, I believe there were 12 Israelis that died in this latest conflict, and 248 or 250 Palestinians. No one knows their names, and we see that the value of human life seems to get less and less each year. But it did seem like on a dime that ceasefire happened, right? It seemed like it might have been right when it was needed, because I think there were a lot of stuff. It was a nice narrative change from things going on at the border, the gas shortage, all those things. So it was definitely something that happened. The money went out and then it stopped. So whether it's the one state solution, the two state solution, just figure it out. And I think that for the price, for the fact that it's the human life that's being lost in this, it's the money that we're having to send to the Middle East to fuel this conflict. And one thing I might add is I'm not Jewish or Muslim, so I'm looking on the outside in at this situation. What I can say is we had a president that was piece by piece brokering peace in the Middle East. I saw that. I figured, wow, if I'm a Jew and I'm seeing what Trump is doing for peace in the Middle East, that's something I can get behind. I can vote for that guy. I like what he's doing. This may bring peace eventually to Israel. But what happens? 70% of Jews voted for Biden. So what's going on here? That's not good enough. If peace in the Middle East is important to the Jewish people, why did I not line up behind the guy who was willing to go there? And that's a real head scratcher to me. It's like we're fronting.
That's a whole nother show. We're not going to get on Trump. You already know what Trump, I was talking to somebody today. I like Trump in certain, it's not about liking it. Just like he had some great points and negative, but he shot himself in the foot. And to me, even since then, Republicans, all this craziness they're doing, even some of the things that, they might be right about in policy or in theory, but the actions, the way you do it, they're just turning people off. But you brought up some good points. I do want to piggyback up on Patrick that, no, we're not talking about the human factor in this. We're talking about land, we're talking about states, and we're talking about all these legalities and territories and sovereign. But what about the people? And that's, to my point, even America, we get lost in the left, right, the middle, libertarian, Republican, Democrat. What about the people? And that was a really, really good point. But, my thing is, and I'm going to go ahead and be very, very biased, I guess, because I'm just really a pure libertarian to my toenails. I'm not for aggression and force, but I'm not, let these other countries fight their own wars if they want to. If nobody is hitting us in the eye, leave them alone. Now, if they hit us in the eye, you hit them back. But if they're not bothering us, but we use all these lame excuses to intervene that, they're refugees, are going to have more integration. It's going to mess up our economy or our finances. And another point that Patrick, you brought up that I really want to zoom in on is that you talked about everything was going fine. It displaced us from thinking about things in America. That's what they call in psychology displacement theory. And this is what politicians do. And Biden is a master at that. We could be having all kind of war, gun wars locally, people shooting on the streets. When you shoot 20 or 30 people in Miami and in Austin, that's a war right here. That's a conflict. But let's deal with that. But no, let's not even worry about that. Let's go worry about Israel. Let's displace all the homelessness. Let's just, not focus on the race issues. They're very real, right, Damon? Let's not deal with the lack of wealth, to Tim's point. Let's not deal with the schools. People can't even read or write. They can't function. A lot of people don't know how to work. Some don't want to work. But let's not even deal with that. Let's not deal with the national debt. I don't even know a word for it. It's so exuberant. I was reading a book the other day, and the guy was going ballistic because it was in the 80s, and our deficit was like $600 billion. It hadn't even reached $1 trillion. And now it's 30, 40 trillion, just continually growing. And I just thought that was so hilarious. So go ahead and finish up, Patrick. But I had to piggyback up on those things.
Yeah, so that was basically the first point I wanted to make, and I'll let someone else jump on here. Is that is peace? Is it more profitable to let these conflicts, these skirmishes, to continue to keep reaping the rewards of U.S. foreign aid? And you can't prove it otherwise. But it would be interesting to see if the official position was financial aid is over until you two figure out treating little children in a way until you two figure your situation here out. No more financial aid, and that would be a very interesting situation to see what direction it goes in, because like we discussed, there's just so much money is being poured into that area, and these conflicts seem to stop on a dime. They flare up, financial aid comes in, and they stop. So that's really the first point I wanted to make.
Interesting. We're going to have to promote you to royalty, the Royal Ambassador of Liberty, the Earl of Every, I don't know. But anyway, speaking of that, we are going to go now to the Duke of Liberty, our main man down in South Florida, Mr. Tim. You're back on the Liberty Show.
Well, sir, I want to thank you again for having me on. I want to give a great big shout out to the panelists, a special shout out to Kevin Wilson, our dear friend in Liberty, to Damon Kennedy, of course, to Patrick Sweet, bringing it home for us. I want to take a different point of view, if I may, when it comes to our aid to Israel. In fact, I have a contrarian point of view when it comes to the aid that we send to Israel. I believe that we are underfunding Israel. And the reason why I believe that we are underfunding Israel, well, if you give me just a moment. So because of Corona, or as I like to call it, Rona, I've been getting into shape. And anyone who works out, they know they have to have a killer soundtrack. You can't get fit unless you have a killer soundtrack. So part of my soundtrack is the Cash Money Millionaires. You all may remember them, Juvenile and Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne, of course, is still popping. And they came out with a song back in the day called Project Chick. And this song is near and dear to me because it marks a period of time in my life when Cash Money Millionaires moved to Miami. And I'm from Miami. This was great. It was a great news event for folks who were from Miami when Cash Money left New Orleans and moved to Miami. Now, in this song, Project Chick, and for the radio, it really isn't Project Chick, but in this song, Project Chick, the Cash Money Millionaires laid out the requirements for what they're looking for in a mate. And they go through this whole gambit of, oh, well, you could have a wife and she does all of this. And at the end of the song, what all of the Cash Money Millionaires have settled on is that the best mate for them is the Project Chick. And the reason why the best mate for them is the Project Chick is because the Project Chick does things that an ordinary partner wouldn't do. The Project Chick is willing to get into the gutter and fight for you. The Project Chick is willing to bust another chick in the face if she has to defend her man. And when I thought about the relationship between America and Israel, a light dawned on me and it hit me that Israel is our Project Chick. Israel does all of the things that we as Americans don't have the intestinal fortitude to do on our own because of the political whims. So what do you mean by this? Well, let's take a look at the regimens or the political forces that have tried to cause different political movements in the region. If we look at Syria, Syria's had folks who have tried to come into office and have come into office who didn't, quote unquote, have America's best interests. And when these insurrections, if you will, have risen up in this region, Israel sent their forces to crush these people that were trying to rise up against Israel. And to rise up against Israel, let it not be mistaken, to rise up against Israel is to rise up against America, because America has a lot of money, a lot of investments in that region. So when we look at Israel, we need Israel because Israel does those things for us that we don't have the intestinal fortitude. And if I can go back into the day before we became so politically correct, we lacked the testicular strength to do what it is that we ought to do, which is to leave the region. And the reason why we don't want to leave the region is because we understand that we screwed up. We screwed the Palestinians, we screwed the Syrians, we screwed the Iraqis, we screwed, take a pick of the people in that region. Somehow, the United States has screwed them over. So they have a justifiable ought, not only against Israel, but they have a justifiable ought against the United States. So what ought does these individuals, these nations, these groups have against Israel? Well, let's take a look at Israel. Israel goes into the region. They go into Palestinian territories and they literally bulldoze those individuals' homes because the Israelis believe that they have a ancestral right to these homes. And the Palestinians, of course, are pissed off about that. They are upset that the Israelis go into these occupied territories that are owned by the Palestinians and wreak havoc. Not only do they wreak havoc in those territories, but they treat them like third world citizens as if they're the interlopers. So these folks, if we look at what's happening in the region, we see when the Palestinians, all of the talking heads got their panties in a twist over the last couple of weeks because the Palestinians were sending bombs over into Israel. Well, what is it that you expect is going to happen when you take people's homes? What is it that you expect is going to happen when you murder and slaughter their children? The state of Israel got upset because they say, well, the Palestinians are just willy-nilly sending bombs over to Israel. Well, they lack the technological advancements that Israel has, has in their armories. And the reason why they lack those technological advancements is because the Palestinians aren't fortunate to have a pimp daddy like the United States. And I'll end on that note.
Well, Tim, you don't get off that easy. Some good points there. We're all, agreeing, but I think really the whole point of the liberty of why are we so concerned about everyone else? Let us not be, what happened to the non-aggression principle? It's so funny. But I wanted to ask you, Tim, because you come from a good Holy Ghost family, like myself, as well as Kevin Wilson. We're all holy Pentecostal, shouting and dancing, speaking tongue people. But a lot of people, especially people on the right, the conservatives, they just, the Bible says, pray for the peace of Israel. Well, I want to say it says pray for the peace of it. It said pray for them. It didn't say go fight with them. It didn't say give them money. It said pray for them. But, we want to, be friends with Israel, and that's what the Bible says. But it's really funny how we want to be so Christian one time. Now, we got to do what the Bible says and be friends with Israel. But in other times, we're lynching people in trees, or we're killing gays and lesbians, or we're, doing this other stuff. What do you think about this hypocrisy of our Christian? We got to, obey the Bible on one hand and not on the other. What do you think about this whole, especially on the right, the far right, that we've got to just put up with anything Israel does because it's based on the Bible?
If you give me a moment, this harkens back. And I don't want folks to just think that I'm one-sided, that I can only talk about Black issues, but I want to, if you give me a moment, let's look at Blacks in this country. What did the slave owners, not only did the slave owners, but the system, the political system, the US government, what did the US government use to keep the slaves in check? They used the Bible. They weaponized Christianity to cause the slaves to believe that their state as a slave, their state as chattel, was within God's will. This is the same thing that the system, the state, uses today to trick and manipulate poor whites, working class whites, poor Black folks, working class Black folks, religious Black folks, and not only religious Black folks and religious white folks, but true believers. So I don't want anyone to believe that I'm talking against Christianity by stating these points. This is what the system does. It uses Christianity, and it goes back not only to the issue of slavery, but if you look at when Social Security, it was a talking point for Christian leadership during Social Security, during the New Deal was, wait a minute, you're stealing from one to give to another. God doesn't like stealing, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is what the system does. This is, and let's define who the system are. The system comprises of the wealthy. The system comprises of the political elite. And the wealthy and the political elites are the individuals and the entities that benefit monetarily by sending US dollars to Israel, sending US manpower in the form of military personnel to the region. And then they go back and they say, well, listen, the Bible says that I will bless those who bless you. So because the Bible says that God's going to bless the people that bless Israel, we need to go and equip the Israelis with these weapons to willy-nilly want to murder these Palestinians. Listen, if that is our belief system, fine. But my understanding is that we aren't a theocracy as the United States. So because we aren't a theocracy or theocracy, we shouldn't be quoting the Bible. We shouldn't look to the Bible to inform our political ways, if you will.
And especially we quote certain pieces of the Bible. You know, like you said, now you want to bless Israel, but then there's other parts of the Bible and we don't want to live it. That just blows my mind. But thank you, Tim. We're going to go back to Kevin Wilson back up in Rochester. Since Kevin, this is your show. You're kind of the co-anchor here. What do you think, Kevin, about any of the comments been made or anything new come to your mind?
Co-anchor. I feel like I just got a promotion. Wow, I'm honored.
No, well, wait a minute. I could take it back now. You know me. You know me. Don't get.
No, I'm sure you. All right, I won't abuse it then. All right, good. No, great points, everyone. Good points, Patrick, with the financial incentives to have peace. And Tim, my goodness, man, you always know how to tell a story and to build a gripping narrative. I'm always so surprised by the comparisons you make, and I love it. And I also want to point out, Tim, like you bring the level of moral outrage that like I didn't quite express in mine, but like there is an appropriate level of moral outrage that ought to be expressed about like some of the stuff that the Israeli government has done and the violations of the property rights and the fundamental liberties of Palestinians over there. But I want to make kind of 2 points about all this. So one is, yeah, Kevin, you had brought up the point, like, you know, a few of us had kind of grown up in like, you know, heavy Christian households. I grew up Pentecostal, and yeah, like supporting Israel was an important part of that belief. So like for a long time, I unquestionably was like, yes, we need to support Israel. The way I would phrase it, the way I used to phrase it is basically like they are like the only like bastion of civilization that exists in a savage Middle East. Like I'd put it pretty in pretty like ugly and stark terms. And you know, as like a Pentecostal, I felt like we needed to support Israel, like not only because of that, because they were the lone force standing against terrorism in the Middle East, but like also like it's kind of mixed up in feelings of like Israel needs to be around for the second coming to happen and all this stuff. So like there's a lot that goes into what like the evangelical like Christian conservative ethos of why there's so much support of Israel. And Tim nailed a bunch of the other stuff too. But something that isn't brought up, because a lot of us kind of seem to be on we don't want to spend money, we shouldn't get involved. And I want to throw our question to everyone else here too, just to make the devil's advocate point of view. It's like, well, isn't it in the U.S. best interest to support the Israeli government? They are a reliable ally. Tim had again made a colorful comparison to that, but they are a reliable ally. We had started allying with them way back in the 60s and 70s because the U.S. government saw them as essential to ensuring trade in the region, to be able to continue to pass through like the Suez Canal and to maintain other trade routes throughout the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Is it important for the U.S. to continue funding a stable and reliable ally in that region for other interests to be preserved, not merely the interventionist interests, but like world trade interests? And also, you know, do we have a moral imperative to support a government that is being attacked by, you know, groups like Hamas too, but mostly like, and I think this will be the more interesting question, does it serve the interest of U.S. trade and stability in the region to support Israel specifically, ignoring all the other conflicts in the Middle East that we also definitely should not be involved in. So I want to throw that out to everyone. Starting with you, Kevin. Let's go.
Great.
You promote me to co-host. I'm going to ask you first. I'm going to put you on the spot, Kevin.
Point, but I'm a libertarian, and I understand what you're talking about, the trade issue, and that's my thing. What about free markets? See, that's right in itself. That's not free markets when we're helping countries and trying to. And I agree. I was alive back in those days when we first started allying with them, and that was really based because that's when we were really dependent on oil, and we wanted to manipulate and control a lot of the oil reserves and keep peace. Now that we're getting away from that, I was reading some articles today, was really fascinating how the majority of citizens and even government officials they don't care about the allies of the Israel as much as they used to, because we're not as dependent on the oil or that trade. The trade now is pretty much Asia. China, we can get mad if we want. China, Japan, and Korea, they have money. They have wealth, as Tim would say, real wealth. They own property. They own the stocks and bonds on Wall Street. So it's really the world trade dynamic has really shifted. And, that really shows what kind of a fickle friend we are. When we need you in the 60s and 70s for oil, you're cool. Now that it's shifting, we're like, okay, who really cares about it? So that is a really good point. But I think that my answer is like, let's let the free markets roll, and let's let the government, especially the U.S. government, stop trying to control the markets, bias, and manipulate it. So, but I want to go next to Damon. Damon, I'm gonna let you answer that question. And I do want to bring up, because I'm always instigating some stuff, but it's like Kevin just brought up a really good point. Do we have a moral obligation? Why do we have a moral obligation for all these people around the world when we have people right here, and Tim brings them, not just blacks, but white people that are struggling, that are hurting, getting raped, kids come up missing. We have bridges here that need to be repaired, but we've got people with no shoes on, people really living from paycheck to paycheck, but we want to help everyone else around the world. What is that? Talk about it, Damon. Help me. You're the Prince of Liberty. Straighten me out.
Well, here's the thing. So it's not exclusive to the United States, but let's be honest, again, putting our libertarian hat on, governments throughout time immemorial have not been known for their morality, right? And especially when it comes especially when it comes to the U.S., our entire MO is if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense, right? So everything that we do has an economic agenda behind it. So kind of like Kevin Wilson mentioned earlier, when we talk about helping them with trade and this, that, and the other thing, again, that's an economic impetus to helping them out. But at the end of the day, like it was mentioned earlier in the show, when Israel goes and basically says, look, Palestinians, hey, this was your land. Well, it's ours now. I mean, that does not help anybody's situation, because I don't care who you are. Let's remove the names Israel and Palestine and just insert any random person. You were in your house watching TV, chilling. Somebody comes in here and says, hey, I know you paid for the mortgage. Everything's cool. But guess what? It's my house now. Are you just gonna be like, okay, that's cool, and you're gonna walk out? No, we're gonna have a fight. You know what I'm saying? Something's about to go down. And unfortunately, to me, I don't think it's that really complicated of a situation to really understand that Israel is in the wrong, not 100% of the time, but in some situations, they're in the wrong. And when we kind of come along and say, well, we don't see anything, Israel, they're our ally. Look, if you're my friend and you just robbed a bank, I don't care if you're my friend. I'm not co-signing it. I'm not doing it. You know what I'm saying? So Israel's over here doing dirt, and we're co-signing because they're our quote unquote ally, but that's not helping the situation. So again, if we just kind of take a referee's approach, say, look, whatever you do, like Patrick said earlier, y'all need to figure it out. If you got two siblings kind of fighting amongst each other, at some point, you as a parent have to say, look, I'm tired of intervening between you two. You're gonna have to figure it out, because once you get tired of messing, one person get on the other person's nerves, y'all at some point are going to figure it out. And so when Israel and Palestine get treated like that, where it's like, look, we're backing away from it. Israel, no, we're taking away the money from you. Palestine, we're taking the money away from you. Figure it out. Have a nice life. And then, if something happens to us as a result of that, then okay, yeah, we can interject at that point. But until that point, y'all need to figure it out. Leave us out of it.
Interesting. Well, you brought up a good point, which when we get back to Kevin, finish up with him, that it was a really good point, Kevin. I understand your question, moral obligation, but the word, as Damon said, moral with our government, with the United States, we can't even use that word. What moral obligation when we come and steal the Indians' land and murder them and enslave people and, rape their women, sell their children, torture them, set them on fire and lynch them in trees, when we deny the right to vote to women and when we mistreat gays and lesbians. I mean, the word moral, and that's the point, the hypocrisy with which I'm glad you guys got it. That's my thing. We have this moral obligation to go straighten everybody else. We need to start straightening out stuff in America. And that is why, a lot of people are promoting like the critical race theory. And it's not that everybody's racist or the whole world, but it's like, let's look at some of our faults and failures and hopefully do better. But we want to straighten out everyone else. And once again, that's displacement theory. So, okay, Patrick, you're back on the new, what did I name you? The libertarian ambassador to the United Nations or something. Anyway.
We'll work on that one.
What do you think?
Well, I did. So I know Kevin Wilson posed the question, and he had talked about how years ago he had a very archaic view that Israel was the lighthouse, the bastion of ideals in an uncivilized part of the world. And I want to say, that view isn't entirely archaic or incorrect. There are still parts of the Muslim world that promote slavery. If women step out of line, they're stoned to death. If you're gay or transgender, you're getting tossed off the roof of a building. So that's still large parts of the Muslim world. So when we look at our alignment, who do you side with? Israel is indicative of Western ideals far more than the Muslim world is. So there is a lot of truth in that. It is who best promotes Western views, Western beliefs. It's going to be Israel more than it's going to be.
Okay, but oh boy, I'm glad you said that. I love you, Patrick. Before I go there, I love you, Patrick. But why does it have to agree with Western views? Who makes us right all the time?
Well, so this is a big. So is Israel in many ways the canary in the coal mine, and that canary would be dead? Are they an example of how Muslims the behavior of Muslims towards a minority demographic? Is the behavior of the Muslim world towards Israel, is that what can be the expectations of a demographic that is in the minority?
Well, I agree with you, but we don't want to stereotype because, and back to Damon's points, but what about the things Israel has done? That's our whole point as a person of liberty. I agree with a lot of pretty much what you're saying, but what about when Israel has done things that are unjust or offensive? You can't I just don't side with somebody just because.
Well, sure. No. And I'm just laying the facts out there. Okay. There's been both wrongs on both sides.
But to the point of Western is, everything, all of our Western ideals aren't always correct, and that's part of the thing we want to, and I think this is a point that if you talk to people from other countries, they, I think somebody mentioned earlier, I think Tim, they don't look at America as this great savior, helper. They look at us as an instigator and button in. Why do we want to make everyone Western? Why can't they have liberty and be themselves? Is my question.
Millions of girls that are on TikTok right now dancing around that if you did that in a Muslim country, you'd be stoned to death. I mean, that alone should get them to support Western.
But I'm saying, can they have their liberty to be them? Do they have to be like us? What makes us so perfect or great that you want everyone to be like us? Do you understand that, even if you're wrong, you should have the liberty to be wrong? Does that make sense?
Well, in wrong in what regard? If you're gay, you deserve to get tossed off the roof of a building.
Well, but I'm saying, but then, there's other things. Don't get me going. All of the different stuff in America of, if you're a police officer and you shoot somebody unjustified, do you get off scot-free? So there are other people that laugh at us. They laugh at us.
Well, suppose you're a Muslim and Sharia law says that the person you shot was a wife who cheated on you. And it's supported under Sharia law that that's okay to do.
But I'm saying in their country, is that okay for them? Or do we, what I'm saying is, can we force, to me, that's not liberty, to force our views, our religion, our morals on other people.
Oh, sure. No, not over there. I'm talking about big picture here. Is Israel.
And I agree with you. I love you, Fur. But no, seriously. And this has been a big criticism of America. We try to force our views on people. Now, I have no problem with proselytizing, preaching, telling people this is what I think is best. This is how I feel. Back to Kevin's question about moral obligation. I personally am just, I was raised as a Christian. Love is just the root of everything. And that's just Kevin. Anybody knows me, I love giving. That's just me. But can I force that upon everyone? If I want to write a check to some orphan Palestinians, but can I take the government taxpayer dollars and forcibly just take it and give it to them? You see my point? Where's people's liberty? Can we force this on people? Is that liberty?
Yeah, forcing support of either picking sides, essentially, right? Forcing
right.
people. Well, and that was how we started the show. Is that just? Is that right? Is that the best use of our taxpayer dollars? Is to support either side of this conflict? And
no, take them taxpayer dollars and send David his reparation check. Because
right. No, I'm just talking about the alignment. If you had to choose a side, why the U.S.?
Well, see, and that's my thing. Do we have to choose a side? I remember one time on our podcast, Ms. Charlotte, she said, well, who do we throw the rock at? Do we have to throw it at either side? Do you guys get where I'm coming from? Why do we always have to choose and get ourselves in a box or whatever?
I think those questions are going to start being asked because you can look at inflation is going through the roof, the consumer price, people are going to get squeezed and it's only going to get worse. Yeah. And if people start opening up their eyes and looking at where our foreign aid is going, they're going to start saying,
I agree. Well, I agree with you there. See, I almost had to fire you as my ambassador, but you're getting it back. But no, that's a really good point. And we're going to move on, is that people's eyes are opening. And to Tim's point, it is the state, the people, nobody listens at us. The people, if you take polls, how they feel, like I was saying, people that traditionally really just was always siding with Israel, they're always right now, they're like, you know what? I'm thinking differently about this. Maybe we just let them fight it out themselves and maybe we just leave them alone. But people really want to focus on America and our issues and our problems. And the good thing with television, with the, the podcast and filming things, all of the different violence and things that we're seeing firsthand that before we would have never known about. People now are starting to question, like you said, and open their eyes. And I think it's not a white thing or a black thing. It's a people's thing, and especially ordinary people thing, working class, like Tim was saying, the rich and the affluent. It's just such a different world between the have-nots or the politicians and the real people. And I'm for everyone having their their liberty. So Tim, do you have another comment before we close out?
I just want to push back on this idea that Israel is this shining beacon of liberty and hope in the region. We have to call a spade a spade. Israel is an occupying force in Palestinian lands, period, point blank. Whether the Palestinians want to slaughter all the gays or not, the Israelis occupying their lands makes them an occupying force.
And a terrorist.
Yes. That's what they are. Now, that's the thing, right? To one man, you are a hero, and to another man, you're a terrorist. So to the Israelis, of course, occupying and conquering more lands is heroic for them because now their wealth has expanded as a nation. But for those people who are being conquered, they are terrorists. So to whitewash, whitewash the activities of Israel as they are this beacon of liberty and hope is BS, because they're not that. In fact, when they occupy the territory, they don't even allow the Palestinians to live their best lives. No, what they do is they say, listen, y'all can do what it is y'all want to do. And then on the next morning, when they wake up, someone says, well, we could use those houses. We could use those lands. Why don't we just bulldoze Muhammad out of his house? So now Muhammad and his folks no longer have a house. Do you think Muhammad thinks that the Israelis are bringing liberty to them? No, they don't. Muhammad sees the Israelis as being an occupying force. In fact, let's even go further. Israel is the newest addition to the apartheid state. They have a two-system state in which the Israelis live under civil law, whereas the Palestinians, because they're being occupied by Israel's military, they're living under military law. So no, I don't buy into this concept or to this thought that Israel is this beacon of hope and liberty and we should support them because at least they're not murdering the gays. They may not be murdering the gays, but they are murdering the Palestinians. And if the Palestinians want to murder the gays, guess what? That's up to the Palestinians to rise up, lock hand in hand with their gay brethren and say, we're not going to accept that anymore. Just wanted to throw that in.
Well, Tim, I just want to piggyback one thing, and then we're going to go back to Kevin, and then each of you will have a closing comment. But, they had a good example. You were talking about Israelis occupying land and taking land. Their big brother, their hero, America, and the Western, back to Patrick's point, Western civilization, that's all they've ever done is conquer lands and take people and imprison people and enslave people. And we're still perpetrating that hundreds of years later. And I'm like you, as a person of liberty, I just can't be behind it, So we're going to go back to Kevin Wilson. Final comments. Kevin, you've been a great co-host, a great sponsor. Shout out to that beautiful son of yours, Seamus. And then we'll get a closing comment from everyone else. So Kevin Wilson, you're back on the Liberty Show.
Yeah, right on. So yeah, a couple comments there. So one, I want to point out that Patrick had made comments about the other Muslim nations doing all these terrible things. Most of the examples, Patrick, that you used were from our ally in the region, Saudi Arabia, which is an actual theocratic kingdom. And no, we shouldn't be sending them money either. And the situation is just a lot more complicated than that. It's not uniform. Not every country that has majority Muslim populations are theocratic. A lot of them are secular. A lot of them are have cultural values that aren't all that dissimilar from our own. And a lot of times the situations in those countries, when you do start to get a breakdown in culture and a return to extremely conservative reactionary values, is after intervention. We saw that in Afghanistan after Soviets intervened. We saw that in Iraq, and when we intervened, we saw that in Iran when we deposed the democratically elected government decades ago, and imposed our own dictator over there. That's the long-term consequences of that is reactionary policies and a return to what feels comfortable in religion. So and again, let me just wrap up again. I'm playing devil's advocate on the Israeli side here. I do have significant problems with us funding the Israeli government, the Israeli Defense Forces, as well as the Palestinians. I do hope for peace. I do pray for peace. But to Tim's point, we need to speak truth to what is going on over there too, and we can't turn away, especially since we are funding this. We can't turn away from the moral atrocities of the Israeli government, and the U.S. government needs to stop funding those and speak out against it. And then to maybe Damon's point, to maybe just say, until you guys get it together, we're just not going to fund this anymore. We're not going to do it. We can't help.
Right.
Thanks so much. That's it.
Okay, Damon Kennedy, 1 minute finale's word.
Okay. So just kind of reiterate earlier, there is no moral compass of the U.S. government. Like I said, if you look throughout the history of the world, man, whenever you see a dictator being deposed, and you see coups and whatever, you probably have the United States. If you peel back the layers of the onion, the United States is behind it in some way, shape, or form. So the idea that we have this great morality and that's why we're backing Israel, no, it's not about that. It's about, they provide us with the best financial incentives. So we're basically the pimp of choice, and we help them with their situation over there. But there's no morality to it. It's just an economic play that we try to make it seem like it's moral to try and get people behind us. But when Israel is doing wrong, we need to call it out as being wrong, and hopefully that will bring the people who are against us now in line and say, look, okay, maybe they're not just currying favor with Israel. Maybe they are standing on principle. But again, up until this point, we have never stood on principle. We stand on whatever most economically feasible and expedient at the time. And actually standing on principle would be when Israel's wrong, we call it out.
Well, that's a good point. Moral in America is just like oxymoron. Okay, Patrick Sweet, the final word, 1 minute.
Yeah, so I think that just to like we talked about at the top of the show, that a solution, any solution is necessary. The foreign aid that we're sending over to the situation can be used here, and it's needed here. And what Tim had said is that by no means was I justifying some of the things that Israel has done, because they're a lot like us, bulldozing homes and everything that goes with it. That's unjustifiable. You can't have that. It just means that there needs to be a solution, and continuing to throw money at this situation, hoping it'll go away, probably isn't going to happen, just because of how much money is at stake in this continuing and occurring year after year. So a solution, any solution, is desperately needed. And by Tim highlighting the things that he did, 10 years ago, no one would know that was even going on. It's just now we're starting to see both sides of the situation. And I think that since we're at that point, we can have an honest discussion about a solution being needed now more than ever. And I see the tides are changing a lot more than they have in the last 10, 20 years even.
Well, I agree. I don't know about a solution, but whether I think they need to come up with a solution. But to your point, our solution is not sending more money, pouring more money throwing more money at a problem, which is what the liberals and the left like to do. It's just, it hasn't worked. So why are we continuing to do it? Well, just to let you guys know, you've been listening to The Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune. We've had a co-host today, Mr. Kevin Wilson from A Free Solution up in Rochester, New York. You can find him on Facebook and at WYSL AM in Rochester. Also, Mr. Damon Kennedy, Patrick Sweet, and Tim Smith. Follow The Liberty Show on Facebook as well as Instagram. Like us, go to YouTube, subscribe, hit the like button, and you can follow. You can go to our website, www.thelibertyshow.us. And we now have Mr. Tim Smith, our public policy director. Last word, Tim, take us out.
Sir, I apologize. I was trying to go long on Halliburton since we're talking about Israel. Talking about Israel makes me try and figure out new ways to make money off of the backs of brown folks in the Middle East. So I just wanted to thank everyone for today's show. It was exciting. It was an interesting conversation. It's a conversation that we need to have more often. We need to call out the allies. And here's the thing, right? We call Israel an ally, but my understanding of an ally is that when I'm about to get punched in the face, my ally, my buddy, takes the hit for me. And when my buddy's about to get hit in the face, I take the hit for him or her. So this is what an ally is. I don't see that relationship between us and Israel. Again, I see Israel as being our wifey. They're the ones that we call when we need them to do something for us that the American people doesn't have the stomach to actually sign off, to actually vote on. So I take a different contrarian view when it comes to supporting Israel. I think a worker, since we're talking about Pentecostalism, I grew up as a Pentecostal holiness. Yes, that is an actual denomination. It is not oxymoronic. I believe a worker is worthy of his wages. So if I'm going to pimp a hoe, I think that hoe deserves her money. And we've been pimping Israel, and Israel deserves all of the financial benefit of being pimped by us.
Well, thank you guys. Once again, you've been listening to The Liberty Show with Kevin Fortune. Thank you so much. And don't just stop with the conversation. Go and put your liberty into action. Liberty to everyone. Good night.